I found a birth certificate hidden in my husband's office. The name was Samuel Scarlett, not Samuel Ball. One search later, I realized, I've been living with a monster. My name is Dr. Simone Carter, and what I'm about to tell you will make you question everyone you think you know. 3 years ago, I married what I thought was the perfect man. Handsome, charming, supportive of my medical career. But perfect men don't usually hide birth certificates with different names. And they definitely don't have 2 dead wives in their past. The story I'm about to share isn't just about deception, it's about survival. It's about how my medical training saved my life, and how sometimes the person sleeping next to you is the most dangerous person in the world. But before I tell you how I discovered my husband was a killer, let me paint you a picture of just how perfect our life seemed. Atlanta, 3 years ago. I was 35, a successful cardiologist with my own practice, and I had just married Samuel Ball at what everyone called the wedding of the year. You know the type, featured in Atlanta magazine, perfect venue, perfect dress, perfect couple. Samuel was everything I thought I wanted. Tall, well-dressed, successful in commercial real estate, and most importantly, he seemed genuinely proud of my achievements. Or so I thought. Looking back now, I can see the red flags waving like surrender flags at a battlefield. But when you're in love, or what you think is love, you have a remarkable ability to ignore even the most obvious warning signs. It's like being a cardiologist who ignores her own chest pains because she's too busy saving everyone else. The first sign should have been how Samuel talked about me at social events. My wife, the doctor, he'd say, like I was his prized possession rather than his partner. Isn't she impressive? I really hit the jackpot. At first, I found it charming. He was proud of me. How wonderful, right? Wrong. What I didn't realize was that Samuel had a very specific type. Successful, independent, accomplished women. The kind of women who looked good on his arm at charity galas. The kind of women who made him look successful by association. The kind of women who, unfortunately for them, also made him feel powerful when he destroyed them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Our life together was, by all appearances, perfect. We lived in a beautiful home in Buckhead, through dinner parties where I'd prepare elaborate meals, while Samuel regaled our guests with stories of his latest real estate deals. He'd bring me flowers every Friday, kiss me goodbye every morning, and tell me I was the most beautiful woman in Atlanta, the perfect husband. Except perfect husbands don't usually make their wives feel like they're slowly dying. It started small, as these things always do. A little fatigue here, some dizziness there. Nothing dramatic enough to raise immediate alarm bells, but persistent enough to be annoying. As a cardiologist, I'm trained to listen to what bodies are telling me, but apparently I'm much better at diagnosing other people than myself. "Honey, you look tired," Samuel would say with such genuine concern in his voice. "Maybe you should cut back your hours at the practice. I make enough to support us both." How thoughtful, right? Except I loved my work. I hadn't spent 4 years in medical school, 4 years in residency, and 3 years in fellowship just to become a housewife. But Samuel's suggestions were always delivered with such care, such apparent love for my well-being, that questioning them felt ungrateful. The symptoms got worse. I'd wake up nauseous, struggle through morning rounds at the hospital feeling like I was moving through fog. My hands would shake during procedures, something that had never happened before. I started making mistakes on patient charts, forgetting appointments. For a doctor, these aren't just inconveniences, they're terrifying. "Maybe you should see someone," Samuel suggested one evening as I sat on our couch, too dizzy to stand up properly. "You've been working so hard. Stress can do terrible things to the body." He was rubbing my shoulders as he said this, his voice filled with such tender concern that I almost cried with gratitude. Here was this wonderful man taking care of his sick wife, suggesting she get help. What a saint! If only I'd known that saints don't usually poison their wives. The wake-up call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was preparing for a complex cardiac procedure when I suddenly felt so dizzy I had to grip the scrub sink to keep from falling. My vision went gray around the edges, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I was having a stroke. Dr. Patricia Williams, my closest colleague and friend, found me there 5 minutes later, still gripping the sink like it was the only thing keeping me upright. "Simone, what's wrong?" she asked, immediately switching into physician mode. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've been feeling awful for weeks. Tired, nauseous, dizzy. I thought it was just stress, but..." Patricia took one look at me and made a decision. "You're not operating today. We're running some blood work." As a doctor, you'd think I would have insisted on running my own tests earlier. But there's something about being the patient instead of the physician that makes you incredibly stupid about your own health. It's like being a mechanic who ignores the grinding noise in his own car because he's too busy fixing everyone else's. The blood work came back 3 hours later. Patricia's face when she walked into my office told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. "Simone," she said carefully, "we need to talk. Your blood shows elevated levels of ethylene glycol," Patricia said, her voice clinical but her eyes full of concern. "Ethylene glycol, antifreeze. Someone was poisoning me." The world tilted sideways. Not figuratively, literally. I had to grab my desk to keep from falling over as the full implications hit me like a cardiac arrest patient hitting the floor. Someone was trying to kill me, and there was only one person with consistent access to my food and drinks: Samuel. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible survival stories. Trust me, this is just the beginning of how twisted this gets. My husband, the man who brought me coffee in bed every morning, the man who insisted on cooking dinner most nights because his poor, overworked wife deserved to be pampered, the man who'd been slowly, methodically poisoning me for God knows how long. "Simone?" Patricia's voice seemed to be coming from very far away. "Are you okay?" Was I okay? Let's see. I just discovered that my husband of 3 years was trying to murder me with antifreeze. On the scale of, okay, I was somewhere between definitely not and what's the opposite of okay? "I need to think," I managed to say. "You need to call the police," Patricia said firmly, "and you need to get somewhere safe. Now." She was right, of course. The logical, reasonable response to discovering your spouse is poisoning you is to run. Call 911. Get as far away as possible and let the authorities handle it. But as I sat there in my office, surrounded by medical journals and patient files, something my father used to say kept echoing in my mind. "Simone, when you have the power to protect people, you have the responsibility to use it." I was a doctor. I had taken an oath to, first, do no harm. But what about preventing harm to others? Because here's the thing about poisoners. They don't usually stop at one victim. If I ran now, if I simply escaped and left Samuel to face whatever minimal consequences the justice system might throw at him, what would stop him from finding another successful, accomplished woman to marry? Another doctor. Simone Carter to slowly murder with morning coffee and home-cooked meals? The thought made me physically sick, which, given that I was already being poisoned, was really saying something. "Patricia," I said slowly, "I need you to keep running those blood tests. Document everything, and I need you to promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, if I suddenly get worse or have an accident, you'll know exactly what to tell the police." Patricia's eyes widened. "Simone, you can't be thinking of going back there. I can't let him do this to someone else. That's not your responsibility." But it was. At least it felt like it was. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe it was the anti-freeze affecting my judgment. But I couldn't live with myself knowing I had the chance to stop a killer and didn't take it. Of course, the fact that I was contemplating returning home to my would-be murderer probably says something about my mental state at the time. Then again, when you discover your husband is trying to kill you, optimal decision-making isn't exactly guaranteed. I went home that night like nothing had happened. I kissed Samuel hello, complimented him on the dinner he'd prepared, presumably with a side of poison, and smiled when he asked about my day. "Oh, I said, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "Just the usual. Saved a few lives, ran some tests, discovered my husband is trying to murder me. The typical Tuesday." "Okay, I didn't actually say that last part, but I thought it very loudly." "You seem stressed," Samuel observed, watching me closely. "Maybe you should take some time off." "Maybe I should," I agreed, pretending to sip the wine while making a mental note to pour it down the sink the moment he left the room. That night, lying in bed next to a man who was actively trying to kill me, I realized I needed more than just blood tests and suspicions. I needed evidence. I needed to know who Samuel really was, and more importantly, if I was right about there being other victims. The next morning, while Samuel was at his office presumably selling real estate and not plotting additional murders, I decided to do what any rational person would do in my situation: snoop through my husband's personal documents. I started with his home office, a room I'd rarely entered during our marriage. Samuel had always been protective of his workspace, claiming he needed privacy for important business calls and confidential client information. Looking back, I realized this should have been another red flag. Who keeps their spouse out of their home office unless they're hiding something? The filing cabinet was locked, naturally. But I'm a surgeon with steady hands and a bobby pin, and apparently that's all you need to become an amateur lockpicker. Who knew medical school would prepare me for breaking and entering my own husband's filing cabinet? Inside, I found the usual business documents, tax returns, insurance policies. Everything looked perfectly normal until I reached a folder labeled Personal Documents tucked way in the back, and that's where I found it: a birth certificate for Samuel James Scarlett, born February 15, 1985, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Not Samuel Ball, Samuel Scarlett. I stared at the document for a long moment, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. My husband had a different name, a completely different identity. For 3 years, I'd been married to someone who didn't even exist. The questions came flooding in. When had he changed his name? Why had he changed it? And most importantly, what was Samuel Scarlett running from that required becoming Samuel Ball? I photographed the birth certificate with my phone, my hands shaking, and not from the poison this time. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and locked the filing cabinet. That evening, Samuel came home with flowers and a bottle of champagne. "What's the occasion?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do I need an occasion to celebrate my beautiful wife?" he said, kissing my cheek. "I thought we could have a romantic dinner tonight, just the two of us." A romantic dinner, with a man whose real name I'd just discovered, a man who'd been systematically poisoning me for months, a man who apparently thought champagne was an appropriate beverage to serve with attempted murder. "How thoughtful," I managed to say. As Samuel opened the champagne, probably spiked with enough antifreeze to kill a small horse, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Once safely locked inside, I pulled out my phone and typed Samuel Scarlett Philadelphia into the search engine. What I found made my blood run colder than any poison ever could. The first result was an obituary from the Philadelphia Inquirer, dated 6 years ago. Scarlett Jennifer Marie, age 29, died unexpectedly at her home on March 15th. Beloved wife of Samuel James Scarlett, services will be held. Samuel's first wife, dead at 29, died unexpectedly. I kept reading, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in the small bathroom. Jennifer had been a successful architect. She died from what the coroner ruled an accidental fall down the stairs of their home. No foul play suspected, but I wasn't done searching. I typed Samuel Scarlett Chicago into the search bar. Another obituary. This one from 4 years ago. Harrison Rebecca Lynn, age 31, died suddenly at Northwestern Memorial Hospital on August 22nd. Loving wife of Samuel James Scarlett. Rebecca was a respected financial analyst. 2 dead wives, both young, both successful. Both died unexpectedly. I leaned against the bathroom door, struggling to breathe. This wasn't just about me. Samuel, or whatever his real name was a serial killer. A man who specialized in marrying accomplished women and then murdering them. And I was supposed to be number 3. The champagne cork popped in the kitchen, followed by Samuel's voice calling out, "Simone, the champagne is ready." I flushed the toilet for cover and opened the bathroom door. "Coming, honey." As I walked back to the kitchen, where my would-be murderer was pouring poison into champagne flutes, one thought kept running through my mind. How exactly does one have a romantic dinner with a serial killer? "There you are," Samuel said, handing me a glass of what I now knew was probably my last meal. I was starting to worry. "Just freshening up," I said, accepting the glass with what I hoped was a convincing smile. Samuel raised his glass in a toast. "To us," he said, "to our perfect life together." "To us," I echoed, pretending to drink while mentally adding, "and to the fact that I now know you're a psychopathic murderer, but sure, let's toast our perfect life." The next few hours were surreal. Picture, if you will, having dinner with someone who's actively trying to kill you while pretending everything is normal. It's like dinner theater, except the play is Husband Attempts Murder, and you're both the starring victim and the only audience member. Samuel was particularly attentive that evening, constantly refilling my wine glass, which I kept pretending to drink, and asking if I was feeling all right. "You seem a bit pale," he observed with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Are you sure you're not coming down with something?" "I'm fine," I assured him. "Just tired from work." "You work too hard," he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "I worry about you." The irony was almost too much to bear. He worried about me. The man who was slowly poisoning me was concerned about my health. If the situation weren't so terrifying, it would have been hilarious. After dinner, Samuel suggested we watch a movie together. We settled on the couch, and he pulled me close, stroking my hair while some romantic comedy played on the television. To anyone watching, we would have looked like the perfect couple enjoying a quiet evening at home. Except one half of the perfect couple was a serial killer, and the other half was secretly documenting her own murder. Throughout the movie, I kept thinking about Jennifer and Rebecca. Had they known? Had they suspected something was wrong before it was too late? Had they felt the same symptoms I'd been experiencing? Had they trusted their husbands right up until the moment they died? "Penny for your thoughts," Samuel said softly. "Just thinking about work," I lied. "A patient I lost today." "I'm sorry," he said, kissing the top of my head. "You care so much about people. It's one of the things I love most about you." "I love how much you care about people," said the man who was actively trying to kill me. The cognitive dissonance was giving me a headache, or maybe that was the antifreeze. That night, I lay awake planning my next move. I had evidence now, the birth certificate, the obituaries, my own blood work showing poisoning. But I needed more. I needed enough evidence to ensure that Samuel would never hurt anyone else again. I also needed to be very, very careful, because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. A man who had successfully killed at least 2 wives and made it look like accidents. A man who was smart enough to change his identity between murders. A man who clearly had experience covering his tracks. One wrong move, and I'd become obituary number 3. But I had one advantage that Jennifer and Rebecca hadn't had. I knew what was happening to me. I was a doctor with access to medical tests and a network of colleagues who could help. I wasn't going to die quietly in my sleep or fall down any stairs. Samuel Scarlett, or whoever he really was, had finally met his match. He just didn't know it yet. The following morning, Samuel left for work with his usual kiss goodbye and reminder to take care of yourself. I waited exactly 10 minutes to make sure he was really gone, then called in sick to my own practice. I had research to do. I started with the basics: court records, newspaper archives, anything I could find about Samuel Scarlett's previous lives. What I discovered painted a picture of a man who was very good at reinventing himself. In Philadelphia, Samuel Scarlett had been a successful insurance agent. He'd married Jennifer Marie Walsh, an up-and-coming architect, after a whirlwind 6-month courtship. Friends described them as the perfect couple. Jennifer's death had shocked everyone who knew them. The police report from Jennifer's death was available online through public records. She'd been found at the bottom of the stairs in their home by Samuel, who claimed he'd been working late and discovered her body when he came home. The coroner ruled it an accidental death. Jennifer had apparently tripped and fallen down the stairs, hitting her head on the marble floor below. But here's what caught my attention. Jennifer's blood work from the autopsy showed elevated levels of a sleep medication she'd never been prescribed. When questioned, Samuel explained that Jennifer had been having trouble sleeping due to work stress, and he'd given her some of his own prescription sleep aids. The medical examiner accepted this explanation. Looking at it now, with the benefit of hindsight and medical training, it was obvious what had happened. Samuel had drugged Jennifer to make her drowsy and disoriented, then either pushed her down the stairs or waited for her to fall. The sleep medication made it look like an accident, just a tired woman who lost her footing. But apparently, the Philadelphia police hadn't been suspicious enough to dig deeper. After Jennifer's death, Samuel had inherited her life insurance policy and the house they'd shared. He'd sold everything, disappeared for a year, and then resurfaced in Chicago as Samuel Scarlett again. Interesting. He hadn't changed his name between the first and second murders. That suggested he'd gotten away with Jennifer's death so cleanly that he felt confident using the same identity again. In Chicago, Samuel had worked as a real estate developer. He'd married Rebecca Lynn Harrison, a financial analyst, after another whirlwind courtship. Rebecca's death had been different from Jennifer's. Instead of an accident, Rebecca had died suddenly of what appeared to be cardiac arrest. But Rebecca's case had gone to trial. I found the court records online, and they made for fascinating reading. Rebecca's sister had been suspicious of Samuel from the beginning, especially when he tried to rush the funeral and refused to allow an autopsy. She'd hired a private investigator who discovered several inconsistencies in Samuel's story about the night Rebecca died. The prosecution had argued that Samuel had poisoned Rebecca with insulin, causing her blood sugar to drop so low that it triggered fatal cardiac arrest. They'd found evidence that Samuel had purchased insulin without having diabetes, and that he'd been researching hypoglycemic shock in the weeks before Rebecca's death. But the defense had argued that the evidence was circumstantial. Samuel's lawyer had painted him as a grieving widower being persecuted by a jealous sister-in-law who couldn't accept that her sister had died of natural causes. They'd pointed out that Rebecca had a family history of heart problems, and that sudden cardiac arrest wasn't uncommon in young women. The jury had acquitted Samuel after deliberating for less than a day. But here's the thing about acquittals. They don't mean you're innocent. They just mean the prosecution couldn't prove you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. After his acquittal, Samuel had once again disappeared. And a year later, he'd resurfaced in Atlanta as Samuel Ball, successful commercial real estate agent, ready to find wife number 3. The pattern was clear. Samuel found successful, accomplished women, married them quickly, murdered them in ways that could be explained as accidents or natural causes, inherited their money and life insurance, and then moved on to the next city and the next victim. It was brilliant, in a completely psychopathic way. But this time, he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd chosen a victim who could recognize the symptoms of poisoning and had the resources to fight back. Now I just had to figure out how to stop him without becoming victim number 3. The plan I came up with was either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both. I was going to catch Samuel in the act. I know what you're thinking. Simone, you just discovered your husband is a serial killer who's been poisoning you for months. Maybe this isn't the time to get creative with your survival strategy. And you're probably right. The smart thing to do would have been to take all my evidence to the police and let them handle it. But here's the problem with that approach. Samuel was smart. He'd already beaten the justice system once in Chicago. He'd made Jennifer's death look so much like an accident that the police never even considered it might be murder. If I went to the authorities with what I had, a birth certificate, some obituaries, and blood work showing poisoning. There was a good chance he'd find a way to explain it all away. Yes, officer. I changed my name. Yes, I was married before and my wives died tragically. Yes, my current wife has been ill, but that's because she's been working too hard and not taking care of herself. Samuel was charming. He was convincing, and he had practice explaining away suspicious circumstances. I needed irrefutable evidence. I needed him to confess, on record, to what he was doing. So I hatched what I now recognize was a completely insane plan. I was going to pretend to be dying. Here's how it worked. I started documenting my symptoms more dramatically. I began accidentally leaving medical records around where Samuel could find them. Records showing that my condition was worsening rapidly. I started mentioning to Samuel that my doctors were concerned, that they were running more tests, that they weren't sure what was wrong with me. I'm scared, I told him one evening, letting my voice shake with just the right amount of vulnerability. What if it's something serious? Samuel held me close, stroking my hair with hands that I now knew were capable of murder. Don't worry, he whispered. Whatever happens, I'll take care of you. The irony was almost too much to bear. I also started preparing for the endgame. I contacted Detective Maria Gonzalez, a friend from medical school who'd gone into law enforcement instead of medicine. I explained the situation, leaving out the part where I was intentionally making myself seem sicker to trap my husband, and asked for her help. Jesus, Simone, Maria said when I showed her everything I'd found. This guy is a serial killer. I know. What I need is enough evidence to make sure he never does this again. What you need is to get as far away from him as possible. What I need, I said firmly, is to make sure he doesn't find a fourth wife. Maria wasn't happy about it, but she agreed to help. We set up a plan where she would be monitoring my situation, ready to move in if things went wrong. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Samuel to spring it. Over the next 2 weeks, I played the role of the progressively sicker wife. I started calling in sick to work more often, claiming I was too weak to operate. I began declining social invitations, saying I didn't have the energy. I made sure Samuel saw me taking my temperature frequently, checking my pulse, looking worried about my health. Maybe you should go to the hospital, Samuel suggested one evening as I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket and looking as pathetic as possible. The doctors keep running tests, but they can't figure out what's wrong, I said. My blood work is showing some strange abnormalities, but they don't know what's causing them. I watched Samuel's face carefully as I said this. For just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Satisfaction? Relief? It was gone so quickly I almost missed it. I'm sure they'll figure it out, he said. Modern medicine is amazing. Yes, modern medicine is amazing. Amazing enough to detect antifreeze poisoning and document it thoroughly. But Samuel didn't know that. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later. I was lying on the couch, playing sick, when Samuel approached me with a steaming cup of tea. I made you something special, he said. My grandmother's recipe for when someone isn't feeling well. The tea smelled wonderful. Chamomile and honey with hints of lemon. It also smelled like it contained enough ethylene glycol to kill a horse. Thank you, I said, accepting the cup. You're so good to me. I just want to take care of you, he said, sitting down beside me and watching expectantly as I raised the cup to my lips. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for. Samuel was making his move and I was ready for him. I pretended to drink the tea, making appreciative noises while actually just wetting my lips with the poisoned liquid. This is delicious, I said. What's in it? Just some herbs and things, Samuel said vaguely. Family secret. Family secret. Right. The secret ingredient was probably enough antifreeze to preserve a turkey for Thanksgiving. Over the next hour, I gradually started acting sicker. I complained of nausea, dizziness, difficulty breathing. I clutched my chest and said I felt like my heart was racing. I think something's really wrong, I gasped, putting on the performance of my life. I feel terrible. Samuel immediately jumped into concerned husband mode. Should I call an ambulance? No, I said quickly. Just Just help me to bed. Maybe I need to rest." Samuel helped me upstairs, his hands gentle and supportive. The same hands that had just served me poison. He tucked me into bed, kissed my forehead, and told me to call if I needed anything. "Try to get some sleep," he said. "You'll feel better in the morning." I wouldn't feel anything in the morning if I'd actually drunk that tea. I waited until I heard Samuel go back downstairs, then quietly pulled out my phone and sent a text message to Maria. "It's happening. He just gave me poison tea, moving to phase 2. Phase 2 was where things got really interesting. An hour later, I started calling out for Samuel, my voice weak and panicked. "Samuel, something's wrong." He came running upstairs, finding me curled up in bed, clutching my stomach and breathing heavily. I can't breathe properly," I gasped, "and my heart, it feels like it's going to explode." Samuel sat on the edge of the bed, his face a mask of concern. "Should I call 911? "I don't know," I whispered. "I'm scared. What if this is it? What if I'm dying?" And that's when Samuel Scarlett made his fatal mistake. Instead of immediately calling for help like any normal husband would do, he hesitated. I could see him calculating, weighing his options. If he called 911, the doctors would run tests. They might find evidence of poisoning. But if he didn't call 911 and I died, it would look suspicious. "Maybe we should wait a little longer," he said finally. "See if you feel better." Let me repeat that. His wife was apparently dying in front of him, and his response was, "Let's wait and see if you feel better." Not exactly husband of the year material, but it got better. "Samuel," I whispered, grabbing his hand with trembling fingers, "if something happens to me, I want you to know how much I love you. You've been the best husband any woman could ask for." His eyes lit up at this, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. Here was his dying wife, telling him how wonderful he was. No suspicion, no accusations, just gratitude for being such a devoted husband. "Don't talk like that," he said, but I could hear the excitement he was trying to hide. "You're going to be fine." "But if I'm not," I continued, "I want you to know that I've updated my will. Everything goes to you. The house, my practice, my life insurance, everything. I want you to have it all." This was a lie, of course. I'd actually changed my will the week before to leave everything to charity, but Samuel didn't know that. "Simone, please don't." "And I want you to find someone else," I said, really laying it on thick now. "Don't spend your life alone. Find another woman to love. Someone successful and accomplished who deserves a man like you." The irony of telling a serial killer who specialized in murdering successful women to go find another successful woman to love was not lost on me. Samuel's eyes were practically glowing now. "You're going to be fine," he repeated, but his voice had a strange quality to it, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "I'm so lucky to have found you," I whispered. "Even if we only had 3 years together, they were the best years of my life." And that's when Samuel Scarlett finally revealed his true nature. He leaned down close to my ear, so close I could feel his breath on my skin, and whispered, "Don't worry, darling. It won't hurt much longer." Confession number 1. But I wasn't done yet. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Samuel pulled back slightly, and for a moment I saw his real face, not the mask of the concerned husband, but the cold, calculating expression of a killer. "The tea I gave you," he said softly, "it had a little something extra in it, something to help you rest." "I don't understand." Samuel smiled, and it was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen. "You've been sick for a while now, haven't you? Tired, dizzy, nauseous? That's because I've been taking care of you, making sure you don't suffer too much." "You've been poisoning me?" "I've been setting you free," he said, stroking my hair with gentle fingers. "You work so hard, Simone. You're always stressed, always worried about your patients. This way, you don't have to worry about anything anymore." "But why?" Samuel's expression grew thoughtful. Do you know what it's like to be married to someone so successful, so accomplished? Everyone always talks about Dr. Simone Carter, the brilliant cardiologist. What about Samuel Ball, the devoted husband who supports her career? There it was, the motive laid bare. It wasn't about money, though the life insurance was certainly a nice bonus. It was about power, about being the most important thing in someone's life, even if that someone was dead. I loved you, I whispered. I know, Samuel said, and that's what made you perfect. You trusted me completely, just like Jennifer did, just like Rebecca did. Confession number 2 and 3. Jennifer and Rebecca? Samuel's smile widened. My previous wives. They were accomplished women, too. Jennifer was an architect, very talented. Rebecca was brilliant with numbers. But they both had the same problem you have. They worked too hard. They needed to rest. You killed them. I helped them find peace, Samuel corrected. Jennifer was so stressed about a big project she was working on. She could barely sleep. So I helped her sleep permanently. Rebecca was always worried about market fluctuations and client portfolios. I helped her stop worrying forever. The casual way he talked about murdering his wives was more terrifying than any horror movie I'd ever seen. And now you're going to kill me? I'm going to help you rest, Samuel said. The antifreeze in your tea should start working soon. Your heart will slow down, then stop. It'll be peaceful, I promise. Much better than the cancer you've been worried about. There were so many things wrong with that statement I didn't know where to start. But fortunately, I didn't have to, because at that moment my bedroom door burst open and Detective Maria Gonzalez walked in with 3 uniformed officers. Samuel Ball, also known as Samuel Scarlett, you're under arrest for the murders of Jennifer Scarlett and Rebecca Harrison and the attempted murder of Dr. Simone Carter. The look on Samuel's face was priceless. Confusion, then realization, then pure rage as he understood that he'd been set up. You recorded everything, he said, staring at me with an expression of absolute fury. Every word, I confirmed, sitting up in bed and revealing the small recording device I'd had hidden under my pillow. Turns out, medical equipment isn't the only technology doctors know how to use. Samuel lunged for me, but the officers were faster. They had him in handcuffs before he could take 2 steps. You bitch, he snarled as they dragged him toward the door. You were supposed to die quietly like the others. Sorry to disappoint you, I said, but I've always been a difficult patient. And that was the end of Samuel Scarlett's career as a husband killer. The trial was a media sensation. The story of the doctor who outsmarted her serial killer husband captured the public imagination in a way that surprised everyone, including me. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through every detail of Samuel's methodical plan to murder me, just as he'd murdered Jennifer and Rebecca. The prosecution painted a picture of a cold, calculating killer who specialized in targeting successful women, marrying them quickly, and then murdering them for financial gain and psychological satisfaction. Samuel's defense team tried to argue that he was mentally ill, that his confessions to me were the ramblings of a man having a psychotic break. They claimed he'd never actually poisoned anyone, that my symptoms were psychosomatic, that the whole thing was an elaborate misunderstanding. Unfortunately for them, I'd saved samples of the poison tea. Lab analysis confirmed it contained enough ethylene glycol to kill 3 people. Additionally, when police searched our home, they found Samuel's antifreeze collection in the garage. 17 different bottles of the stuff, which seemed excessive for a man who owned only 1 car. The prosecution also brought in experts who testified about the deaths of Jennifer and Rebecca. When they exhumed Jennifer's body, something that hadn't been done during the original investigation, they found elevated levels of sleeping medication in her hair follicles, proving long-term administration rather than a single dose. Rebecca's case was reopened, and new evidence emerged showing that Samuel had purchased insulin under a false name just weeks before her death. Samuel took the stand in his own defense, which was probably a mistake. Under cross-examination, he couldn't explain why he'd changed his name, why he'd hidden his previous marriages from me, or why he'd been systematically poisoning his wife while claiming to love her. His charm and manipulation tactics that had worked so well in personal relationships fell flat in a courtroom setting. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they led him away, he looked at me one last time and mouthed, "You should have died quietly." I mouthed back, "Sorry, I've never been good at following directions." But the story doesn't end with Samuel's conviction. The investigation into his crimes revealed something that still gives me nightmares. There were likely other victims. During the year between Jennifer's death and his marriage to Rebecca, Samuel had lived in Denver under the name Samuel Sterling. Police found records of him dating several women during that time, including a Dr. Lisa Chen, a neurologist who had died in what was ruled a car accident. Her car had gone off a mountain road, and investigators at the time concluded she'd fallen asleep at the wheel. But when they re-examined the case in light of Samuel's pattern, they discovered some disturbing facts. Lisa had been experiencing symptoms similar to mine in the weeks before her death: fatigue, dizziness, nausea. Her blood work from her last doctor's visit showed abnormalities consistent with poisoning, and Samuel had been her boyfriend at the time, the last person to see her alive. The case was reopened, but because so much time had passed and because Lisa's body had been cremated, there wasn't enough evidence to bring additional charges. Samuel would never face justice for Lisa's death, but at least her family finally knew the truth about what had happened to her. There was also a woman in Denver named Sarah Mitchell, a successful lawyer who had dated Samuel briefly before disappearing entirely. Her body was never found, and the case remained open. Police suspected Samuel's involvement, but again, without a body or concrete evidence, they couldn't prove anything. The final tally of Samuel's confirmed and suspected victims was staggering: 4 dead women, 1 attempted murder, and God knows how many others who might have escaped or whom we'd never identified. The psychological evaluation performed on Samuel during his trial revealed a textbook psychopath with narcissistic personality disorder. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the psychiatrist who examined him, described him as a predator who specifically targeted accomplished women because their success made his eventual domination over them more satisfying. In other words, Samuel didn't just want to kill successful women. He wanted to prove he was smarter and more powerful than they were. The fact that Jennifer was a talented architect, Rebecca was a brilliant financial analyst, Lisa was a respected neurologist, and I was an accomplished cardiologist wasn't coincidental. We weren't random victims. We were trophies. Dr. Harper's report also revealed something chilling about Samuel's methodology. He didn't just pick names out of a phone book and hope for the best. He researched his targets extensively before approaching them. He knew about our careers, our achievements, our personalities, even our romantic histories before he ever introduced himself. In my case, Samuel had been coincidentally showing up at places I frequented for months before we actually met: the coffee shop where I got my morning latte, the gym where I worked out after long surgery days, even the medical conferences I attended. He'd been studying me like a predator studies prey, learning my habits and preferences so he could craft the perfect approach. When we finally met at that charity gala, it wasn't chance. It was the culmination of months of stalking and preparation. Samuel had bought a ticket specifically to that event because he knew I'd be there. He'd researched the cause, learned enough about cardiology to hold an intelligent conversation, and even arranged to be introduced to me by a mutual acquaintance he'd cultivated specifically for that purpose. The mutual acquaintance, by the way, was horrified when she learned the truth. He seemed so genuinely interested in supporting cardiac research, she told me later. He asked such thoughtful questions about the foundation's work. I thought he was exactly the kind of man you needed to meet. She wasn't wrong, technically. I did need to meet Samuel, just not for the reasons she'd imagined. The trial also revealed details about Samuel's previous identities that painted a picture of a man who had been reinventing himself for years. Before becoming Samuel Scarlett in Philadelphia, he'd been Samuel Stone in Boston, where he'd been accused but not convicted of insurance fraud. Before that, he'd been Samuel Shaw in Portland, where he'd worked as a financial advisor and had been investigated for embezzling client funds. The pattern was always the same: establish a new identity, build a reputation as a charming, successful man, target accomplished women, and when things got too hot or complicated, disappear and start over somewhere else. Samuel's real name, as far as anyone could determine, was actually Samuel Kowalski. He'd been born in Detroit to a working-class family and had apparently decided early in life that he deserved better than what honest work could provide. His first known crime had been in college, where he'd been expelled for cheating on exams and forging grades on his transcript. From there, it had been a steady escalation: fraud, embezzlement, and eventually murder. What struck me most about learning Samuel's history was how long he'd been perfecting his technique. By the time he met me, he wasn't an amateur killer making it up as he went along. He was a seasoned professional who'd spent years honing his craft. The methodical way he'd poisoned me, the patience he'd shown in building trust before beginning the actual murder attempt, the careful attention to making my death appear natural. These weren't the actions of someone acting on impulse. This was someone who'd had plenty of practice. During the months following Samuel's conviction, I found myself struggling with a question that kept me awake at night. How many women like me were out there right now, married to charming men who were slowly killing them? Samuel's case had received significant media attention, which led to other women coming forward with suspicions about their own relationships. Detective Gonzalez told me that in the 6 months after Samuel's trial, their department had received over 200 calls from women who were worried their husbands might be poisoning them. Most of these cases turned out to be anxiety or paranoia triggered by the media coverage, but 7 of them resulted in arrests. 7 other women who discovered, thanks to the publicity around my case, that their loving husbands were trying to kill them. 7 women who might be dead now if Samuel's story hadn't been told. That realization changed my perspective on everything I'd been through. Yes, I'd been victimized by a psychopathic killer who'd spent months systematically poisoning me. But I'd also been given an opportunity to save other women from the same fate. My decision to stay and gather evidence instead of simply running had been dangerous and arguably stupid, but it had also prevented other murders. The foundation I established after the trial, the Jennifer, Rebecca, and Lisa Foundation for Family Violence Prevention, has helped fund research into domestic poisoning cases and provided resources for women who suspect they're being harmed by intimate partners. We've also worked with medical schools to train doctors to recognize the signs of intentional poisoning, since many cases go undiagnosed because healthcare providers don't think to look for it. The Foundation's work has revealed some sobering statistics. Intentional poisoning by intimate partners is far more common than most people realize, but it's also significantly underdiagnosed. Many cases are dismissed as stress-related illness, chronic fatigue, or psychosomatic symptoms. Women in particular are often told their symptoms are all in their head when they're actually being systematically poisoned by someone they trust. We've identified several red flags that healthcare providers should watch for: unexplained symptoms that worsen at home but improve when the patient is away, symptoms that don't respond to standard treatments, partners who seem overly controlling of the patient's medical care, and patterns of illness that coincide with relationship milestones like marriage or inheritance. The Foundation has also worked with law enforcement to develop better protocols for investigating suspicious deaths among spouses. Samuel's case highlighted how easy it is for a skilled killer to make murder look like accident or natural causes, especially when the victim trusts their killer completely. But perhaps the most important work we've done is education. We've created materials to help women recognize the signs that they might be in danger, resources for safely documenting suspected poisoning, and guidance for working with healthcare providers and law enforcement to build a case. Because here's the thing about Samuel and men like him. They count on their victims' trust and love. They count on women like me thinking, he loves me. He would never hurt me, even when all the evidence points to the contrary. They count on us making excuses for them, explaining away suspicious behavior, and giving them the benefit of the doubt, even when doubt isn't warranted. Most of all, they count on us staying silent. But silence is what allows predators like Samuel to move from victim to victim, leaving a trail of dead women behind them. The day after Samuel's sentencing, I went back to my medical practice for the first time in months. My colleagues had kept everything running smoothly in my absence, but it felt strange to be back in the familiar environment of the hospital after everything I'd been through. "How are you feeling?" asked Dr. Patricia Williams, the colleague who'd probably saved my life by insisting on those blood tests. "Like I've been poisoned by my serial killer husband, but otherwise fine," I replied. Patricia laughed, which was the reaction I'd been hoping for. One of the things I'd learned during my recovery was that humor, even dark humor, was essential for healing. If I couldn't laugh about the absurdity of my situation, I'd go crazy thinking about it. "Seriously, though," Patricia said, "are you ready to be back?" I thought about it for a moment. Was I ready? I'd spent months being systematically poisoned by someone I trusted completely. I'd discovered that my husband was a serial killer who'd murdered at least 3 other women. I deliberately put myself in danger to catch him, then testified in a high-profile trial that had made me a public figure whether I wanted to be or not. But I was also alive. I was healthy. I had work that I loved and a chance to help other women avoid the fate that Jennifer, Rebecca, and Lisa had suffered. "I'm ready," I said, and I was. My first patient that day was a 45-year-old woman who'd been experiencing chronic fatigue, dizziness, and nausea for several months. Her primary care doctor had run the standard tests and found nothing abnormal. She'd been told it was probably stress. "I know this sounds crazy," she said to me during her consultation, "but I keep thinking about that doctor on the news, the one whose husband was poisoning her. I've been feeling terrible for months, and the only person who could be doing something like that would be my husband. But he loves me. He takes such good care of me when I'm sick. He makes me special teas and brings me my meals in bed." I looked at her for a long moment, remembering another woman who'd been told her symptoms were stress-related, who'd trusted a husband who brought her special teas and took such good care of her when she was sick. "Let's run some additional blood work," I said, "just to be thorough." The blood work came back positive for ethylene glycol. That woman, Susan Chen, became my second save. Her husband was arrested 2 weeks later, and investigators discovered he'd been planning her murder for months, just like Samuel had planned mine. Susan's husband turned out to be part of a larger pattern that law enforcement was beginning to recognize. Men who specifically targeted older, successful women for financial gain. Unlike Samuel, who seemed to kill primarily for psychological satisfaction, Susan's husband was motivated purely by money. Susan's life insurance policy was worth $500,000, and her husband had significant gambling debts. The investigation into Susan's case led to the discovery of an online forum where men shared strategies for handling difficult wives. The forum, which was shut down after the investigation, had included detailed discussions about various methods of poisoning, how to avoid detection, and how to make murders look like accidents or natural deaths. It was a how-to guide for domestic murder, and it had thousands of members. That discovery led to the largest domestic violence investigation in Georgia's history, resulting in dozens of arrests and probably saving hundreds of lives. All because one woman thought her symptoms sounded familiar and asked her cardiologist to run some extra blood work. 5 years have passed since Samuel's conviction, and I still think about him sometimes, not with fear or anger. Those emotions served their purpose during the investigation and trial, but they're not useful for moving forward. Instead, I think about him with something approaching clinical fascination. How does someone become so disconnected from human empathy that they can spend months poisoning someone who loves them? How do they look in the mirror each morning, knowing they're systematically destroying another person's life? Dr. Harper's psychological evaluation provided some answers, but not complete ones. Samuel's childhood had been unremarkable. No significant trauma, no obvious triggers for his eventual development into a psychopath. He'd simply been born with a brain that processed empathy and emotion differently than most people, and he'd chosen to use that difference to exploit and harm others. The scariest thing about Samuel wasn't that he was a monster. It was that he was a monster who could perfectly imitate a loving husband. He'd fooled me completely, and I'm not a naive person. I'm a doctor, trained to observe and analyze, supposedly equipped to recognize when something isn't right. But Samuel had been so good at his performance that I'd attributed my suspicions to paranoia, my symptoms to stress, my growing unease to wedding jitters, and the normal adjustments of married life. That's the real horror of intimate partner violence. It often comes from people who are supposed to love and protect us. We're conditioned to trust our spouses, to give them the benefit of the doubt, to assume good intentions even when evidence suggests otherwise. Samuel counted on that trust. He weaponized my love against me, using my desire to believe the best about him as a tool to keep me compliant while he slowly killed me. But here's what Samuel didn't count on. My medical training gave me resources he hadn't anticipated. When I finally realized what was happening, I had the knowledge to understand it, the connections to investigate it, and the skills to document it properly. Most importantly, I had the professional obligation to protect others, not just my patients, but future potential victims. That's what ultimately saved my life. Not just the realization that I was being poisoned, but the decision to use that knowledge to stop Samuel permanently. During the months of my recovery, I attended therapy to help process the trauma of discovering that someone I loved had been trying to kill me. My therapist, Dr. Rachel Martinez, helped me understand something important. I wasn't just a victim of Samuel's crimes. I was also a survivor who'd actively fought back. Many people in your situation would have simply run, Dr. Martinez told me. The fact that you chose to stay and gather evidence, despite the enormous personal risk, shows incredible courage. Or incredible stupidity, I replied. Sometimes courage and stupidity look very similar from the outside, she said with a smile. The difference is in the outcome. The outcome, in my case, was that Samuel would never hurt anyone else. That fact made all the risk, all the fear, all the months of pretending to be a loving wife to a man who was systematically murdering me worthwhile. But recovery wasn't just about processing what had happened, it was also about figuring out how to trust again. Samuel had taught me that people I loved could be capable of unimaginable cruelty, that charm and affection could hide the most sinister intentions. How do you open your heart to someone new when you know, intellectually and viscerally, that love can be a weapon used against you? The answer, I learned, is slowly and carefully, but not fearfully. About 2 years after Samuel's conviction, I met David Chen, no relation to Susan Chen or the murdered Dr. Lisa Chen, just one of those cosmic coincidences that life sometimes provides. David is a pediatric surgeon at the same hospital where I work, and we met in the most romantic setting imaginable, during a joint consultation on a child who needed both cardiac and general surgical intervention. Our first conversation was about blood flow and surgical timing. Our second was about post-operative complications. Our third was about whether we wanted to grab coffee after our shifts ended. David knew about my history from the beginning. It would have been impossible to hide, given the media coverage of Samuel's trial. But he also knew me as Dr. Simone Carter, the cardiologist who'd saved dozens of lives, not just as the woman who'd been married to a serial killer. I have to ask, he said during our fourth coffee date, do you think you'll ever be able to trust someone completely again? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. I don't know, I admitted. But I think maybe the goal isn't to trust completely. Maybe the goal is to trust wisely. David smiled. What does that mean? It means paying attention to red flags instead of explaining them away. It means trusting my instincts instead of dismissing them. It means loving someone without losing myself in the process. That sounds healthy. It sounds terrifying, I corrected, but also necessary. David and I have been together for 3 years now and married for 8 months. Our relationship is built on transparency, communication, and mutual respect, all things that were completely absent from my marriage to Samuel. David encourages my foundation work instead of trying to control it. He celebrates my professional achievements instead of treating them as threats to his ego. He supports my independence instead of trying to make me dependent on him. Most importantly, when I occasionally wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety about whether someone I love might be trying to hurt me, David doesn't get defensive or dismissive. He understands that these fears aren't about him. They're about healing from trauma, and he works with me to address them. "Do you want me to make breakfast this morning?" he'll ask when he notices I'm having a difficult day. "Actually, let's make it together," I'll reply. And we do. We make breakfast together, we eat it together, and we both know that this small act of shared preparation is about more than just scrambled eggs and toast. It's about building trust through transparency, about creating safety through partnership. It's about learning to love again after someone used love as a weapon against me. The foundation continues to grow, and we've expanded our work beyond just education and awareness. We now fund research into the long-term effects of intentional poisoning, provide financial assistance to survivors who need medical care, and operate a confidential hotline for women who suspect they might be in danger. The hotline has been particularly rewarding. We staff it with medical professionals, law enforcement officers, and survivors who can provide both technical expertise and emotional support. Last month, I received a call from a woman in Oregon whose symptoms sounded familiar. "I've been feeling awful for weeks," she said. "My husband keeps telling me it's stress, but I found your foundation online and I'm wondering if I should get some blood work done." "What kind of symptoms are you experiencing?" I asked. "Nausea, dizziness, fatigue. But the weird thing is, I feel worse at home than I do at work. And my husband has been so attentive lately, bringing me tea, cooking my meals, even doing the grocery shopping so I don't have to." Red flags, multiple red flags. "I think you should definitely get blood work done," I told her. "And I think you should be very careful about what you eat and drink at home until you get the results." The blood work came back positive for thallium, a heavy metal poison that's often called the perfect murder weapon because it's colorless, odorless, and difficult to detect unless you're specifically looking for it. The woman's husband was arrested a week later. During the investigation, police discovered he'd been researching her life insurance policy and had even contacted real estate agents about selling their house, all while his wife was slowly dying from the poison he was feeding her. That save, our 43rd confirmed save through the foundation, reminded me why I'd chosen to stay and fight instead of simply running when I discovered Samuel's true nature. Every woman we help, every potential victim we identify, every killer we help catch is a victory not just for that individual woman, but for Jennifer, Rebecca, Lisa, and all the other women whose lives were cut short by men who viewed love as a tool for control and murder. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices. What if I'd never looked through Samuel's filing cabinet? What if I'd ignored my symptoms or explained them away? What if I'd run instead of staying to gather evidence? In those alternate timelines, I would probably be dead. Samuel would have inherited my life insurance, sold my practice, and moved on to find wife number 4. And somewhere out there, another accomplished woman would be slowly dying while her loving husband brought her poison tea and told her how much he cared about her health. But that's not what happened. What happened is that I refused to be a quiet victim. I used my medical knowledge, my professional connections, and yes, my willingness to take enormous personal risks to stop a killer. What happened is that Samuel Scarlett, or whatever his real name was, finally met a victim who fought back. And sometimes, When the world feels dark and dangerous, when I read about another case of intimate partner violence or another woman who didn't survive what I survived, I remember that fact, and it gives me strength. Because here's what I learned from being married to a serial killer. Evil exists, and it often wears the face of someone we love. But courage exists too. Knowledge exists. The willingness to fight back exists, and sometimes, if we're very lucky and very brave, justice exists as well. My name is Dr. Simone Carter. 5 years ago, I discovered that my husband was a serial killer who'd been slowly poisoning me for months. Today, I'm alive, healthy, remarried, and running a foundation that has saved dozens of women from similar fates. I didn't just survive my marriage to a monster, I helped ensure that he would never create another victim. And if you've listened to this story and recognized something familiar in your own life, if you've been experiencing unexplained symptoms that your loving partner seems so concerned about, if your instincts are telling you something isn't right, even though everything appears perfect on the surface, I want you to know this. Trust your instincts. Get medical testing. Seek help. Document everything. And remember that love should never make you sicker, weaker, or more dependent. Real love builds you up. It doesn't tear you down, and it definitely doesn't slowly kill you with poison tea and false concern. Your life is worth fighting for, even if, especially if, the person you're fighting is someone you once trusted with your heart. Because sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who tell us they love us while they're planning our destruction. But knowledge is power, vigilance is protection, and survival is the ultimate victory. Don't be a quiet victim, be a loud survivor. Your life may depend on it. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe, not just for more incredible survival stories, but because sharing these stories can literally save lives.